This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, it is 5 o'clock and I will call the Finance Committee meeting, Folk City Council to order. Thursday, November 19th, 5 o'clock. Mr. Okins, do you want to do roll call?
Councilman Nelson,
Here.
Councilman Fagerly,
Here.
Councilman Osmus,
Here.
Councilman Alvarado,
Here.
Councilman Davis.
Here.
Also in attendance are City Administrator Grumman and Finance Director Okins at this time.
All right, thank you. Before we start the agenda, I just want to take a moment. I don't know if you were aware that Dr. Cindy Firkin-Smith was one of the people who spoke today with Governor Walz and shared a great deal of information about Caris Health, Rice Hospital, and the things that are going on here. And you might want to track that down and check it out. It was quite sobering. And I don't know if anybody else watched it, but it was scary for me to hear the status of the hospitals in the area and those types of things. So I just bring that up just because of the week it's been, and we get asked lots of questions, and I think it would be good for you to hear her words. So what we wanted to accomplish tonight was to review the fund balances and the revenue side, and in mostly, I think, just to get our arms around kind of what we're facing with our budget. This pertains to the budget that was presented from the mayor. That's the information I'd like to go through with that. And I did talk to Steve a little bit, and the first sheet that we got is the financial, the notes to the financial statements from December 31st, 2019. And I thought it would be helpful for us to just walk through those different columns, the non-spendable, the restricted, and the committed. And then Steve did send out a CAR report for the other balances also. And so I think it would be good for us to have the discussion just so we understand what cash we have and why it's restricted. And I hope that that will lead us to a conversation a different time to talk about if we're going to spend some of those, or if we might have to spend some if we were to encounter budget cuts. But my goal tonight, and as it was last time, is for us to have an understanding of why we have the cash that we have and what we can do with it. Mr. Gramitz, are you okay with that? I didn't get a chance to talk to you today, so.
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Okins. Do you want to start with non-spendable?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I don't know if you want this screen up or if you want the committee action form up. The committee action request form only addressed those major items that basically are under the committed column. That would be $1 million or in the close to $1 million or more. So I'm going to jump back and forth if that's okay with you. I'm going to.
I just want to make sure we all understand why things are non-spendable or restricted and committed. And so if we can just knock off those two categories, then we can get back to the CAR report of the bigger ones that are in committed.
Okay, in the CAR report, it does explain the non-spendable, and these cannot be spent due to that they're not in spendable form or they're contractually required, meaning that we would have paid some bills that would be allocated for next year's budget, where we would prepay on subscriptions and those types of things. I'll jump back to the other form here. That's the primary reason for the non-spendable, is that we've already spent the money. It's for allocated costs for next year, primarily subscriptions. And you'll see that throughout all the way down the column there. The restricted column, again, by definition, is there are constraints, and those are basically imposed upon the city externally by either grants, state statutes, or other governmental regulations, and they're imposed upon the city. And so bond covenants and tax increment, those funds again are restricted. So that would be that column as well. Are there
Does anybody have any questions on either the non-expendable or the restricted? Councilmember Alvarado.
Okay, so what thank you, Councilor Nelson. So I'm looking at the restricted column, and it says law enforcement, forfeitures, human trafficking, explorer funds. So this is money that it looks like the law enforcement has gotten, so that's their money, so that's why it's restricted. Is that a simple way of saying it, or too simple?
Madam Chair, and Julie, you'll probably be able to correct me if I misspeak here, in that the forfeiture funds are confiscated items that have been forfeited and have been sold, and there's a state statute that requires that be used in a certain way for the police department or law enforcement. The Explorer Fund and the Trafficking Fund are funds that the police department has requested be set up. The Explorers do fundraising, and so those funds are to be used to buy uniforms and those types of things for the Explorer group. CERT is another citizen emergency. Julie, again, you may have to help me with that acronym. And we've asked to have these acronyms changed. Is another citizen group trained where they again do fundraising for that specific purpose. So when they're out fundraising, it can't be used and shifted to someplace else. The Fire Department Explorer, the same thing as the Police Explorer group, where they have a youth organization that goes out and raises funds to kind of promote law enforcement and future firemen. Julie, I don't know if you have any additional comments to that.
No, that's correct. Forfeiture funds pretty much have to go towards drug education or drug training. And then the other Explorer funds are self-explanatory.
Steve, could you do, oops, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, so what I'm understanding is that those funds are pegged for a specific purpose, and that's just the way it is. Boom, it's done. Up and down that column. You don't have to elaborate on what they are, but like the special assessments and the Rice Memorial Hospital is specifically for those groups, and that's why they're restricted. That's all I needed a clarification on. So thank you.
Yeah. That restricted column is again restricted by outside forces, either bond covenants, tax increment agreements, or in the case of the hospital, that's the debt service, as well as the special assessment or debt service bond covenants that restrict those dollars. Those are reserves that are required by the bond sales. The permanent funds that you see down below, the $30,000 was an endowment given to the city for the maintenance and upkeep of Selvig Park by the Selvig family. And so the earnings from that $30,000 initial gift has to be used to maintain and up on Selvig Park.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the non-spendable or the restricted? Not seeing anything. You want to go on to the committed, and I think Mr. Gramis wanted you to use the ones that were in the car report first of all. Is that what we're doing?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I saw Julie had a question.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's okay, you may cover it. I'm just wondering where, I'm not seeing a large amount that comes from the wastewater treatment plant. That's probably a totally different thing here.
The waste treatment would not be shown on this footnote because it is an enterprise fund and shown separately in the financial statement.
Are we gonna talk about that? Can we access that?
You can access that. Again, you have to maintain on the waste treatment, according to the bond covenants, 1 year debt service and 6 months of operating. But there would
Okay,
be,
we're gonna see those figures later.
I didn't have them for tonight, but we can supply them at a future meeting, certainly.
Okay.
Okay, we're gonna move on to committed.
Madam Chair, under the committed definition, as you see here, there are constraints imposed by formal action of the city council, either the present city council or past city councils. And in order for those dollars to be reallocated or reused, it would take similar action from the present city council. So those funds are basically internally committed and directed by the governing or the city council. Now, some of those have additional ramifications, and that's what we tried to explain in the CAR report, in that all the committed funds except for the community investment fund, which is the $9.8 million figure on the column, can be reallocated or changed by a simple majority of the city council. The Community Investment Fund has been, when it was created, set up in the city charter and is more restrictive in that there are different requirements, and I didn't include that tonight, but there are 3 different priority listings. It takes 7 out of 8 council members to allocate any of those funds. There is also, in a memo that we sent out to the council back in May, any allocation of those dollars for a capital project that's been in the 5-year capital improvement program would need to identify what additional operating costs would be and the sources to pay for those. And that would be the restrictions on the Community Investment Fund. Councilman Osmus has a question.
Yep, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Julie.
So if we, in a vote of 7 out of 8, decided that some of this money could go towards the City Hall Community Center, the costs are basically what they are now. We have what staff we already have at those different facilities, and the custodial for what the maintenance is, correct?
The costs, as I would guess they would be, again, has to be identified. I would think that the majority, or I guess I don't know exactly what's being talked about as far as the janitorial notes, but I would think that a majority of those would be similar to what they are today. Again, if those funds are reallocated, the other item that this fund is used for is for, as you see on the committee action form, payment of our city portion of our street program. And so if those funds do not generate enough to make those payments, then the property tax levy would have to be increased to make those payments. And as you see there, the outstanding debt balance for street program and that at the end of 19 was $16.8 million. So each year we decertify the amount that would be levied because there's been enough money, interest earnings and the $4 fee coming from this fund to make those payments. Did that answer your question, Councilman Osmus? I don't know if there would be additional costs I have not been involved in any of the discussions as far as what's being
I-
proposed for a new community center or city hall.
I really hope that we will look at these fund balances, not just as a way to look, can we build a new city hall? But what would it do to the street program? I think we just got to understand why they're there. That, to me, the city hall is a different conversation and a different direction. This was to review, why they're there. And truthfully, I'm concerned if we have to come up with $1 million, if we don't get LGA, can we afford to do that without disturbing our budget? And so I appreciate your passion for that. And I know that's where you wanted to go last meeting too, but really, we got to get through this and figure out what we have and why it's there. And then, if we were to choose to do that, what would we have to do streets? That's a different subject, I think. But that's my
No,
understanding. Am I not correct?
I
That
think
we would
they
have to come up with
dovetailed
a
them.
different
I mean,
method.
even like with last week, it's just a understanding where these different funds are, what they can
Yep.
be used for. And I just want
Correct.
to clarify then, if they can be used for the City Hall Community Center, then we're all aware of that. And we know, because I know a number of council members are wondering where that money could possibly come from. And so
Right. And that's,
we have to
well,
take
and
care of this budget. And yes, that's part of the process. I think they dovetail.
I don't disagree with you, but I think the budget that we're trying to get through and see how we're going to do does not include the city hall right now. And so we've got a different issue with balancing the budget and how we're going to do that. I appreciate that. And, I think what we're getting is helpful. But I think for me, it's about getting through to the budget, getting the budget done, and with that. So I appreciate that. Go ahead, Mr. Gramitz.
In the end, the city hall has a funding mechanism which ultimately would rely on debt service. And that's the last resort. And I think what I understand some council members are wondering is if city hall costs $8 million and we could use 4 million of our existing funds, that means we only have to go into debt for the additional 4. So again, I think as Councilor Nelson mentioned, that is a goal of ours to find out if that's in fact true. How much money you have versus how much money you want to spend to reduce that amount of debt in the very end. For the purposes of the budget, I think it's good for everybody to understand where all the money comes from. And I think for my purposes, I really believe that Steve needs to identify for the city council how much interest do we garner off of $9.8 million that reduces the levy? And as we're all aware of, we're not getting much on interest right now. So how much was that offset, Steve?
I'm going to try to look, but as you indicated, the rates now are less than 0.5% for 3 years or more.
Wasn't it like 125,000 or I mean, it was, what we're talking about, the interest earned off of this 9.8 million is like a 1% increase in the tax levy, $140,000. I'm going to use that as an example. It might be 220,000, but we're not talking that this 9.8 is offsetting, lots and lots of taxes. So although it's important, if you were to use half of that money, you would only be losing $75,000, of interest.
At this point, Mr. Gramitz, we are projecting $100,000 for next year, and we were at 63,000 through August. And those rates have dropped dramatically since then.
Yeah, so that proves my point. I guess what I'm saying is, if the city council said came to a conclusion the use of this money was more important than the earning of $50,000 worth of interest, I need to use 5 million of this money, and I know I'm going to lose $50,000. That's within your rights to make that decision. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get to, is that this fund is usable, but you have to weigh it out against what's the ramification to the tax levy next year, or, you know, when you use it. And right now, if you took half the money away, you'd have to increase the tax levy by $50,000 roughly. Not exactly, but roughly. So that's the picture I guess I want to paint for you. Here's some money. You can use it if you want. I think Steve said 7/8 of the council has to approve it. The offset is you might have to raise taxes by $50,000 in order to use this 5 million over here. Okay?
So, okay,
Everybody understand that?
I got the earnings part. So then as long as we're going down this road, what does it do to our debt service? We've used this kind of as a way to pay for streets and a way to do, I mean, that's how we've based what we can do for bonding. So if we spend this, what does it do for our debt service or our ability to bond?
Well, for debt service, you won't have that $50,000 to pay off existing debt service. You'd have to levy for that. What that does to your ability to bond in the future and have a good bond rating and get the lowest interest rate possible, that may have an impact. Because, you know, looking at your fund balances is what they look at. Steve and I had a conversation where if you plan to draw down your fund balance for a particular purpose and you let everybody know in plenty of time, people don't get excited. But if all of a sudden, you know, the bonding agency notes that you blew $5 million and they don't know why, they're going to have some big questions. And it's a surprise, and nobody likes surprises. So if that was something you were interested in doing, you got to divulge that and say, we anticipate drawing this down, but in the next years, we'll put the money back, you know, kind of a thing if you can. So, you were not going to have the answer to what it will actually do because you won't know until it happens. But you can make some assumptions that they look at Wilmer and say, you're a good credit risk because you've got good fund balances. So, but that's the balance itself. But the actual use of that particular fund was we're only drawing off interest. And we're getting very little of that now. Not saying we can't, get more later, but right now, that's part of your decision-making process. What's it worth? So I hope that answered your question.
Well, so take us into what effect it has on the amount that we do streets for, because we always are worried whether we can. So help me. Let's finish that conversation then.
Okay. If let's say we got zero off of this account and you didn't want to spend it, I think the city engineer would still put forth $2.5 million worth of street projects, or that would be payable by taxes and other things. He'd still put forth those things, and when it came time to how are you going to pay for them, Steve's going to put that in the debt service column and say the debt levy just went up. What we do now is we look at this account and say, oh, look, we're going to have to increase the debt levy, but we can offset that by this $100,000 that we got in interest. So, and either way, your debt levy is going to go up. It's just how much. Is it going to go up because you use some of the principal and don't have as much interest, or is it going to go up as much as it can because you didn't touch this account? That's what this count is all about, as I understand it. Is that correct, Steve? That we're only using the interest, and that's $100,000, and our debt was, what did we sell the bond for? 1.9?
Yeah, the last street bond was about 1.9. The interest and the $4, and it projected, because of the interest rates at the time, of using a portion of this 9.8 to make up the difference for 2021. So again, these numbers are as of the financial audit on 12/31/2019. So if there's been action by the council and projections for 2021 budget, these numbers may be reduced, and that's the case for this account. But yes, the debt service portion of that 1.9, I think the assessments were, I'm guessing, in the 700,000, and so the difference will have to be made up from this fund over the 10-year period, principal and interest.
Say that again. It has to be brought back up to 9 million?
The amount that assessments will not pay on that of difference of basically $1.2 million over 10 years will be paid out of this fund. That has been the practice. Now, the council could increase the property tax levy.
It's paid off the interest of this fund. You take the interest and apply it towards that debt service.
Well, the principal and interest is paid out of this fund. On the total $1.9 million of bonds issued, that's the principal amount. Now, principal and interest payments over 10 years are going to be in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. If you only assess for $700,000, that's going to be in about $100,000 per year range. So the difference is being paid from the proceeds of this fund, which is only now, like you said, only going to be projected to be $100,000 in interest earnings. And so in order to make the full payment, you are using some of the fund balance, and the $4 fee goes in here as well. But
Okay.
it's this
Go ahead,
fund covering the difference between what assessments will pay and what the principal and interest payments are on the 10 years of street programs.
You're talking about the city share of the bond.
That's correct.
So
There are two revenues to pay the bond payments. Three revenues. There's the interest earnings, which we are projecting to be lower. There's the $4 fee, and then the remaining amount comes from the fund balance here. Up until this year, there's been enough interest earnings and the $4 fee to make those payments. Projected in 2021, some of the fund balance will have to be used because of the increased street work in the last couple of years.
go ahead, Julie.
And how much do we make with the $4 fee? Remind me again.
Approximately $400,000 annually.
So just to clarify, over the years when we've looked at street improvements, we have not done some streets some years because we haven't had enough funds available to do this formula. Am I correct?
The choice of the council has been to look at the available funds and size the street program, except for the last couple of years, based on available revenues. Now, the last couple of years, we've done more street work, which has increased the liability to this fund. So the council certainly has the choice to do whatever level of street work they are willing to levy, because there's not enough $4 fee or interest earnings to pay for. So it's total decision.
Mayor Calvin, just a minute. So if I understand correctly, if we use this fund or reduce the fund, we would literally have to come up with a different way to do our streets?
Well, you would fund it through the property tax levy.
Because right now we don't levy for streets.
The city has not levied on the property taxes for the payment of streets or its debt.
Steve,
Okay.
for clarification purposes, since you say we actually take principal out of this account, if we remove 40, let's say $5 million out of here, we'd still have 4.8 million. And any interest generated from that, plus any of the principal amount, could go to help pay that debt off. You really don't have to increase taxes until this account goes to zero, correct?
That would be correct. That'd be a correct explanation of the fund.
Okay. Mayor Calvin, you had a question. Did I lose him?
Hello, yes, thank you, Councilmember Nelson, Chair. I just want to remind the council also that in the past, and Steve will remember the number, I won't, we used to have a fair amount of people that would allow the city to do the, basically the funding of the street project for them. And then we charged an additional fee for that. So, and I'm going to use numbers that are not correct. Steve, correct me, look them up if you can find them. Let's say that we paid 1% for our bond. Then we charged 3%. Well, then we had 2% coming in. What we've had happening recently is because people can borrow money on the open market cheaper than what we were charging. I think this is true for the last 2 years, Steve, if I remember right. Yep. People paid those off. That then left 2% left for that we normally would receive on interest income in what you're talking about that would go into the street program. I think my 2% number is close, Steve, but I know my 1% is way off. So
yeah,
that's something else to remember for the council is that we had that. And then the other point, then, and Steve's probably got the numbers there, but the other point that I want to make up is that for, I believe it was 3 years in a row, we took money out of, I will call council funds that the council had the ability to move, one of them being the Emergency Appropriations Fund. We took money out of that to do streets because it was the wish of the council to do more streets. And I believe 1 year we took 500,000 out for that, Steve. I think that number is pretty close. Might have been 750,000. But so we took some additional monies out that way too, and those dollars have not been paid back.
So just walking through the street part, I mean, there's a lot of people in this community who thinks we should be doing more street work. So my concern would be if we're spending this money has been sitting there to work with streets. If we choose to use it for something else, we now will have to levy to do streets, which we're behind on. And so for me, it's complicated whether this is something that should be used other than streets. Maybe there's a way to do streets differently. But to me, it's very complicated. And I think we just need to be careful with what we're doing. And the other thing, that $4 assessment is now being used to fund streets. And literally, we asked the utilities to cover that so that where the $4 thing should be renamed or something. That's a different subject. But since it was brought up in the street part, I think there's some people who feel that's almost like a little double dipping that we're doing with the utilities. And so we can come back to that. But let's come back to, does anybody else have any questions on this fund? Julie?
Okay, when Mayor Calvin refers to people that want us to do their streets, who are we talking about? What streets would we do for people?
We don't do streets for people. We do the streets for the city and we special assess those costs to the adjacent property owner. When we sell the bond at 1%, we charge 3% and charge the property owner over 10 annual installments with interest. And that's what he's talking about. Some people pay their assessment off immediately upon receipt. Others people will pay it off over 10 years. The debt is at 1% for us, but the property owner is paying 3 to borrow that money from us. So we do accumulate that amount only on the people who make those annual payments, not on the people who pay it up front and say, you know, I paid it off 100%.
Okay, that makes sense. I wasn't sure if we were, and this is going way down the rabbit hole, but if we were talking about those streets with the blue, the private streets. Anyway, with the blue street names.
Mr. Okins, go ahead.
The streets that Councilman Osmus are referring to, the private streets, those would be all done by agreement between the city and the association that would have those, and they would be 100%. The city would normally either require them to pay 100% on a billing and not assess them because they're not public streets. Usually a developer's agreement would require payment for that prior to the city getting involved on private streets. And the mayor is in 2019 budget, and we'll look at the equalization or the emergency fund balances here later down in the screen here, but it was reduced from 2.6 million to $2 million. 600,000 was used for streets, and that was in the 2019 budget by council action.
Okay, all right. Community Investment Fund. Does anybody else have any other questions they would like to ask at this time regarding it? I don't, go ahead, Mr. Okins.
Councilman Nelson, I see that Councilman Plowman has joined us and the mayor. Are those the only two additional from the original roll call vote?
Councilmember Meske is here too.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. I was supposed to tell you that, wasn't I?
That's fine. My screen doesn't show everybody.
Okay. Councilmember Alvarado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What has more weight for the city? A better bond rating or having, you know, what gives us a better ability to get more money or that sort of thing? It seems like having a reserve like this community investment fund, having that in reserve allows us to borrow money more cheaply. Is that correct?
That would be correct in the regards that the rating agency, which we will be going out for this year, does look at that, looks at the usage of it as far as paying the debt, which secures it. And thus we would maintain our rating because of the level of bonds we have, and the rates would be better.
How are we, let me ask about that. You talked about the emergency fund that went from 2.6 down to 2 million. Are we trying to pay that back now, or have we not had any luck doing that?
If I remember correctly, we just decided to reduce it. Was that not correct, Mayor Calvin? Just to reduce that fund by that amount and put it to work with streets. Am I correct? I'm seeing yes, shaking heads here, so.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, yeah, that was a decision that was made. And that decision was made after we had a presentation from the state emergency management director at the time. I believe it was Kevin Lear. Steve, help me with the name. I think that was what his name was. And he said that fund was adequately funded. He actually said we could go lower than the 2 million, but he said that we could safely go to the 2 million. So we did have bond counsel that gave us that basically approval. Our auditor gave us that, not the thing we just did. And then the emergency management director said that would have been okay. That was how that decision was made.
Yeah, Mr. Okins.
two items to go along with Mayor Kelvin's comments are that the fund balance policy actually sets those dollar levels, and so that could be reduced in that policy. You have to amend the policy. Again, they are listed here, if you look at the screen, as number 6 and 7 at $1 million for the current year and $1 million for in next year. And so it's a 2-year. It was meant and set up so that it would give the council, in case they needed to use it, 1 year and budget cycle in order to decide if they want to replenish it or set the level at a higher or lower level. Give them 1 year to react to it.
Okay. Everybody good? All right. Mr. Okins, do you want to move on to working capital?
The working capital, $4 million, is an actual number that we spend $4 million between January and June, and then again in July through December due to local government aid and property taxes coming in twice a year. And so we actually, by the time you have personnel costs and other costs, would be $4 million that we would need to borrow or use other funds to cash flow that. We actually spend $4 million more between those timeframes because of those two main revenues coming in twice a year.
So are we, do other communities have, I mean, is this a normal amount or a normal working capital compared to other cities?
If other cities do cash flows and fund their cash flow, they would do that. I'm not exactly sure. I have not done research on it. Brian or Administrator Gomez has a comment.
Go ahead, sir.
If you contact the state auditor, they'll tell you that you need to have 35 to 50% of your general fund balance to deal with this cash flow issue. And so many cities just utilize that number. If they've got a $10 million general fund budget, they have $5 million on hand to meet that 50% or less, down to 35%. Steve, you can maybe, if you have it, off the top of your head, what our general fund balance total would be compared to the 35 to 50% that the state auditor recommends.
We have been closer to the 100%. We've been more than that. And that's due to the reserves that you see there and past council action, doing the self-insurance reserve, the emergency reserves, the cash flow, and those types of items. So we've been in the 80 to 100%.
I would just want to note for the city council that in normal communities, and I don't want to say normal, other communities would have that general fund balance that's usable to spend, and it would not be cut up into all these little funds with all the restrictions and all the votes and all the purposes laid out for it. It would be just undesignated general fund balance available to cash flow your community from tax payment to tax payment. I will say Willmar is probably on the high side of having everything in a bunch of pockets with a bunch of rules and regulations on how you use it. It helps maybe when you bond because you've got a lot of money sitting there and you're a good credit risk. But on the other hand, it hobbles you with lots of rules and regulations. If you were to say, as we may talk about later, local government aid gets cut. We do have an account here of $1 million for emergencies that you could tap into. Other cities would just go to their $5 million and tap into it. You actually have a fund set up for emergencies. And that's the difference probably between, the strategy of how Willmar did it and maybe other communities. So this is kind of unique. Not bad, not good, it's just unique. And
Oops, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Grant.
that's fine. That's all I want to say. I don't want to repeat myself.
We would listen. Mr. Elkins, go ahead.
Madam Chair, in regards to the emergency fund, that is an item that is also in the city charter that allows the council to set aside up to 10% of its current year operating budget. But that again is only an up to number. And that's a charter item that's been in there since I've been here.
Okay, so working capital. Anybody else have any questions on the 4 million? Mayor Calvin, go ahead.
If I may respond to Councilmember Alvarado's question as far as the bonding and stuff. And our city administrator has alluded to it, and Steve has bumped up against it quite a few times, but I just want to make sure that the council understands that when we're in the position where we're, and I'll call it cash heavy, it makes it a lot more favorable to keep us at that rating. I think when you look through these numbers, you can easily see that there are ways that we could take some of those dollars and use for whatever the council chose to use it for, and still keep our good rating. The problem is like Mr. Oken said, it isn't until you go out on the market to find out really what they're going to tell you your rating is. And I mean, we voted to do that on Monday night, so we're going out on the market, so we're going to know. Springstead has given us, I think we're still a blank, but Steve, when's the last time we went out on the open market? It's been a while for the safe side.
I believe 3 to 4 years ago, correct.
Right, that we went out on the open market. Otherwise, we've been placing the money locally. So this is a very good time to do this. That's a very good question.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Grammitz.
Yeah, and I think for my purposes, I just want to go on record as saying, put the weight of your bond rating at a respectable level, but don't overburden it, I think, in your mind. Because one of two things happens. And the first one is the state of Minnesota went through this a few years ago, and they were in hard straits, and they ended up selling bonds, and they depleted their rainy day account, and it was woe is me, the world's coming to an end, the interest rates are going to be so high, and they ended up being like a quarter basis point. I mean, it was like nobody cared in the end. I've seen it at city level where the people that buy your bonds don't really care. They're doing it because it's their hometown, and they're gonna bid in on the low price, the low interest, and they don't really care about earning the maximum. And so even when you go out and sell bonds, the fear is your interest rate's going to go sky high, and that usually never happens because there's people that still want Wilmer bonds because of its financial reputation. It's a good, solid community, and you're not going to go bankrupt. So they're willing to not gouge you on the interest. So I've seen it, in too many years in too many cities where everybody gets wound up about their bond rating and their interest rate. And in the end, it's such a small item to be worried about. So I just want to, throw that out there. Yes, it's part of the equation, but the state and many cities have found out that it's not a killer item. It's not going to stop you from selling bonds, and it's not going to go from 1.3% and now you got to pay 7. That's not how it works. It's 1.3 versus 1.4. So it does have an impact, but it's not a big impact in the end. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what our bond rating is, because I think one year when we were concerned about Rice Hospital and with where their profit and loss was and what it would do to our bond rating, I think was one of the first year, or when we looked to local to do it versus going out to the market. So it'll be interesting to see this year how it looks. Mr. Okins.
That will be one of the items. The bond rating agencies and Administrator Grommetz, I'm sure, has been through this many times as well. They do look at the financial position of the community, but they also look at other factors as far as manufacturing. They will look at the hospital debt and the financials of the hospital due to the lease covering that debt. I don't know what kind of impact COVID may have in this discussion and the ability of revenues to pay that, but they look at stability of employment of employees. There's a number of factors, and so we have expressed the abilities to increase our tax base for the industrial park since that is shovel ready. We also use the asset of Midwest Campus that a lot of other communities do not have, as far as the ability of the community to grow and be able to pay ongoing debt. So there's a number of factors in addition to the financial status as well. You're correct.
Okay, that was number 2, working capital. I'm looking for hands. We're going to move on to number 3, year 2021.
Madam Chair, members of the council, Mr. Mayor, and number 3 is the annual carryover or excess dollars that would not be designated or committed to other items. That is given to the mayor. It's a slightly smaller due to the audit versus what you would see in the budget books, and that's just due to a timing issue. I think there's about a $20-some thousand difference that gets reconciled when we total up the budget, but that is all dollars that would not be committed for other purposes or restricted. And that's an annual process that is factored into the 2021 budget to balance it. That, along with estimated revenues, balance it to the appropriations that are proposed.
Is everybody good with that? All right. Number 4, self-insurance.
Madam Chair, members of the council, Mr. Mayor, the self-insurance is a fund balance reserve that has been built up over a number of years. The idea for doing that was to gradually increase our deductibles. This fund had been paid for through premium savings through the League of Minnesota Cities Insurance Trust. It was used temporarily at one point for improvements to the auditorium. And that amount has been repaid to bring it back to the $1 million level that past councils has set.
Any questions on that? Doesn't look like it. Let's go on to number 5.
Number 5, Madam Chair, members of the council, Mr. Mayor, our employees and retirement severances of $2.1 million, $375,000 of that is for, and probably should be reclassified to restricted, because that is for retirees dollars that they have left with the city due to contractual allowances where they can leave it with the city to pay for health insurance premiums. The remaining amount there are, again, some labor contract obligations for vacation and sick leave that would be paid upon separation of employment by different employees. That would be the total.
Councilmember Osmus.
Let's just make sure that one stays flush, okay?
Anybody else want to comment on that one? If not, we'll move on to the next one. Number 6.
Madam Chair, number 6 and number 7 we talked about. Those were the emergency appropriations that were at $1.3 million in 2019. They were reduced both to $1 million. We've talked about that. I really have no additional comments other than the city charter allows the council to set aside as an emergency or a fund balance up to 10%. That's a charter allowance. It does not say it has to be done.
Okay, so is that a normal thing with other cities, or
As
is it?
Administrator comments indicated, that probably is not common in other communities. Why it was initially put into the city charter, I'm not aware and not knowledgeable of the history of that. But a lot of communities, I would guess, would not have that.
Anybody else wish to comment about that one? Mr. Meske, Councilmember Meske, our charter expert, you don't have any comments on it?
I do not. I would say, looking at these things, you've heard the pros and cons of these things. I happen to align myself in the idea that having reserve funds that are dedicated for specific things assures that those specific things are covered at some point if you need them, because otherwise you may be overspending in other areas. So I would fall on the side that I think all these funds with dedications is a fiscally sound way of doing things, but that's neither here nor there.
All right, Mayor Calvin, did I see you had your hand up?
You did, but I decided not to comment. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Last opportunity. We'll move on to number 8.
Number 8, Madam Chair, members of the council, Mr. Mayor, is a dollar amount, $1 million. It has been used historically for cash flow of paying for projects until permanent financing can be obtained. So it's basically a cash flow again, or could be used to fund capital items with a payback of, I think, 5 years is what the practice has been from the past councils.
When was the last time we used it?
It was used, it would be used to pay for street project costs until permanent financing can be done. It was used for some industrial park expenditures until the dollar amounts from available revenues were determined to be water and wastewater, but is not used frequently.
Okay. If we jump over to the notes, there's 773,000 in industrial development, then the airport, and then PIR. So would you just address the difference?
Okay. The Community Investment Fund, PIR, would be, I would guess, would be a mislabel. The $1 million that I just referred to in the Industrial Development Fund is $1 million as the explanation I talked to. That PIR should not be on that. It should be just Community Investment Fund of 750.
The 773? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I don't see what number you're, 773, the Industrial Development Fund?
Yes.
That is proceeds from the sale of industrial parkland that the council has obligated for the Y project on the relocation of the utilities. Now, we are still working. The council approved a $1.3 million cooperative agreement, 50-50 with the municipal utilities. And so that's what that 773 is. Now, it's my understanding that the number is somewhat less than what the contract with the state is, but I have gotten no confirmation from the state to reduce that number. We have a written agreement with the state for 1.3 million, I think, or $1.4 million. 50% again of that is to be paid from water funds, and the 700,000 is to be paid from this fund.
Okay. Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Just a question, because I do believe that that some of those projects, the utility relocation, are coming in quite a bit under budget. What happens to the funds that are allocated that direction if and when we do have surpluses? where do those funds go?
Madam Chair, Councilman Plowman, once the agreement would be amended with the state of Minnesota, and I believe the number I've heard is from 1.3 to about $800,000 anticipated costs. Those dollars would go back into this industrial development fund at that point as an uncommitted amount that has been used for expansion of the industrial park, but it would be uncommitted. It would stay in the fund until the council would take action to do otherwise.
If I may, Chair Nelson?
Yes.
Okay, so then that basically the account in terms of being encumbered, it then becomes unencumbered and we can use it for future investment development as the industrial park grows and expands?
That's correct.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Calvin.
I would caution us not to move that out of the industrial development fund. I don't know that that's what is being suggested, but because of the amount of development that needs to happen there, I would strongly encourage you to leave it as a special revenue fund in the industrial development. So I just want to go on record of saying that, because we're going to have a lot of work out there that needs to be done.
I appreciate that. My goal is for us just to understand, because when people say you've got all this money, what do we have it for and how are we using it? So I think it's helpful for us to all understand it. So, thank you. Mr. Okins.
Madam Chair, members of the council, the dollar amount has accumulated from the sale of a couple parcels. There are vacant lots in the industrial park, but there is also, as we've talked about, and I believe Administrator Gromans has mentioned to the council, the possible sale of additional land that would be outside the present platted industrial park. So, but again, these dollars by past council has enabled the city to expand and do the improvements to get it shovel ready. The mayor is 100% correct.
Okay. That's number 8, industrial development. Any other questions? I do not see. We'll move on to number 9, capital improvements.
Madam Chair, capital improvements, again, $941,000 would be partially available if not spent in 2020. Some of the projects that we have discussed are the auditorium. There was $250,000 carryover from 2019. I have requested from all the department directors a list of status on their 2020 capital improvements. The auditorium also had a $485,000 item in 2020. And there would be, at this point, I've not heard back from all the department directors, but possibly an additional $500,000 available of unspent capital funds.
Okay. Any questions on capital improvements? I do not see any. Mr. Okins, can we jump back over now? I know that you put together the ones that were like $1 million or so. Can we just jump back over and take a look down? I also want to make sure we recognize that these are balances from last December, and so they don't really reflect the current cash situation, but I think Mr. Okins can address some of those.
Madam Chair, what I would recommend the council members to do, and we can address this at our next meeting and our wrap-up meeting, is to compare these numbers to the binders, the 3-ring binders that most council members have received. The CVB, that one, we are reevaluating the $298,000. That is basically the 3% lodging tax and has to be used for promoting the community. And so even though we show it as committed, I saw a chat there. So committed, it maybe could be restricted because the city does receive 5% of all proceeds to handle administration of that. So we evaluate these on an annual basis with the auditors. The local option sales tax projects had a balance of 402. Again, that probably could be restricted because the council, again, by the state law, is restricted on what they can use it for. They can only use it for the approved local option sales tax projects. And so that one probably is misclassified at the end of the year as well. The airport, the council certainly has the ability to fund that. Operations. Library improvement reserve is a balance, and we have communicated numerous times with the library about using that, or it may get reappropriated. It's my understanding that there is a memorandum signed of allocating that to repairing and replacing the roof. Okay, I see the chat.
Calvin?
Mr. Oaklands, I believe it was going to be used for the heating system. I thought is what the internal agreement was.
Okay,
I thought I was in a conversation that said it was going to be used because we had discontinued that. I know at one point, this is a number of years ago, I had recommended that those dollars get transferred into the city budget, and the council was not in favor of that, of course. Because we were trying to get them to spend those funds down. And if you said it, Mr. Oaklands, I apologize, but this is money left over from the first local option sales tax. And that's where these money come from. So the longer we carry these on our ledger, the more questions come of why do we still have money from the first local option sales tax? So the council has full authority to move that out and use those funds however they choose. But the council, and I do agree with, has said, we want it used for library. So I know we had a conversation about that a number of years ago, I'm guessing 4, when I had moved that out, but I don't believe it's been discussed since then.
I asked Mr. Oaklands because I thought we'd had a conversation about it sooner than, like last year, whenever that, and I thought they had agreed to spend it. So I was surprised that it was still there. So Councilmember Austin.
Same here, because I was instructed to go talk to bring that up, and they said that it was done, that they had spent it. Yes, it was going to be for the roof, or it was going to be for carpeting or for the floor, but they made it sound like it was done. Like
Mr. Oaklands.
I believe the mayor is correct in that it was the heating system. I just heard comments recently about a roof, but I believe you're right, it was the heating system. We just have not been billed from the county, so the work may be done. Again, these are numbers at the end of the year, and the memorandum, it was like a email memorandum that was just manually signed, and so that I remember seeing. But again, until we get billed from the county, those dollars would remain. And so we can communicate with the county administrator to see the status of the actual work and if we're going to be getting a bill from them.
It would be nice if that's the case, that it was gone before the end of this year.
We will communicate that. I see Mr. Gromans is writing himself a note as we speak.
Okay, what else do we have, Steve?
Main Street and bike share are dollar amounts that were there at the end of the year. They're both being proposed. Public Works Reserve. Public Works Reserve is the $4 fee that gets transferred in, and that's just an amount that did not move over. Again, there was some of that money a couple years ago, if the mayor recalls, I think that was used also for street work. It was a cash influx rather than leveraging it to make debt service payments. And then moving down under the capital project funds, again, the street projects probably could be reclassified as restricted because those are bond proceeds in the construction accounts, just waiting for final estimates. And I believe there was a lot of accepting projects and authorizing final payments at the last council meeting. So a lot of those funds will be gone. The majority of them probably are, since we had the construction season after 12/31, 2019. So.
Okay, what else do we have left there? Street projects, airport. Those are funds.
Right. You'll see there that they'll be listed both under special revenue and capital project. I'll use the local option sales tax as an example. The sales tax revenues come into the special revenue classification because that is restricted and committed, and then transferred into the capital project funds. Same with airport and any other bond proceeds. They come in, we have to account for them in one area and transfer them to the project once we have approved budgets and actual contracts that are happening. So those are probably expended by this time.
All right. Any other questions on any of the line items? Not seeing any. Administrator Gramitz, did we accomplish what we wanted to do with our community, our car report and walking through those, or do you have any additional comments?
I don't have anything additional at this point.
Okay. Mr. Elkins?
The only comments I would have are referring back to Administrator Gramitz's budget narrative that he handed out to the council when the budget was presented to them. It talked about the revenue changes. There were 3 increases. The first one was a 3% increase in the property tax levy rate, which generated about $308,000. The second is a projected local government aid increase that the Department of Revenue has certified to the city of 3.2%, or little under $157,000. And the third was a transfer from the 2021 street improvement projects, now that engineering is fully staffed and would be doing the majority of the engineering design and everything in-house. This was an item that we used to have in past budgets of about $250,000 to cover time spent by the engineering staff.
Okay.
The other items mentioned on the revenue side, as far as decreases in the projected budget, we are projecting about a 13% decrease in building permits, and that's due to economic conditions. Interest earnings are projected to be 2%, roughly $49,000. Number 3 were rents reduced because of the Mid-Minnesota Development lease. Part of City Hall will no longer be in place. Insurance reimbursements are down by 33% due to a reduction of retired employees and the city health insurance. And the refunds and reimbursements are reduced due to the Rice Hospital Caris Health, Rice Care Center being sent directly to them. Those were the projected revenues that were factored into the budget. There were also 3 potential revenues that were not included. The CenterPoint Energy franchise fee could generate between $250,000 to $300,000. Property tax increases could be increased, and that would only be in the case of if there was a cut in LGA at this point, because the preliminary levy has been set. And then any sale of excess land, either in the industrial park or other properties that the city may own. And we will be providing a map to the council, to the mayor and council, of city-owned property in 3 classifications: buildings, parks, and vacant land.
Okay. Mayor Calvin, I saw it pop up there. You said there was an email sent in 2019. Is that what you were sending us?
Yeah, I sent it to Mr. Oakens, City Administrator Gramitz, and also the entire council. It was a request from 2019
Yeah.
to use the money for a HVAC controller. I was going to use about 167,000. So I guess my memory still is sharp on some things, maybe a long time ago, but not so recent. So
Okay. All right.
just wanted to make sure the council had that information.
Thank you. Are there any other questions as it relates to fund balances or revenues in the conversation that we had tonight? I am not seeing any. All right. Mr. Oakens, do you want to review our time frame that we have to that we talked about when our decisions have to be made? And I'm sorry, Councilmember Osmus, you had a question?
Just that information that Steve just gave us on the reductions in some of those revenues. Did we get that in? Is that one of the?
It's in the budget book. It also was reviewed at our last meeting, and I
Right.
think he put it out at that time too.
Okay, because I didn't know if I wasn't seeing it on the screen, and I thought, but I knew I had read it or knew it. And so when he was saying that it was like a reduction of 13%, there wasn't a dollar figure that went with that, and I didn't know if anybody else was following along with something. But okay, that's fine.
Madam Chair, Councilman Osmus, yeah, I do have the dollar amounts, and they are included in the memo from Mr. Gramitz. The 13% reduction in building permits is $50,000. The $22,000 interest earnings is $49,000.
Yep.
Sorry,
I just wanted to know where I would go to find that, where that was from.
It's right at the beginning of the 3-ring binder too. Councilmember Davis just posted that too. So,
Okay.
all right. So we're good with that conversation. Mr. Oakens, we need to be done with budget conversations. Would you review that, please?
Yeah, the last finance meeting had set Monday, November 30th as a possible date to discuss the capital improvements and to wrap up any kind of further discussion or additional information that the council may want. The truth in taxation hearing is scheduled for the city council meeting of Monday, December 7th. We are working due to new restrictions on meetings, on phone in and those types of things. And I'm communicating with the school district and the county. So the truth and taxation hearing is scheduled for December 7th. The council can continue that hearing until the following meeting of December 21st, if they so choose. The final tax levy has to be certified to the Candy White County by December 31st. And so you could have the second meeting as a continuation hearing or any special meeting between that time if they wanted to have additional discussion.
So we had talked about not doing next Monday night, but to do the next finance meeting would be on.
It would be December, it would be after the truth and taxation hearing would be the normal next finance meeting, which would be December 10th, if you did not hold the November 30th meeting.
Okay, what are the wishes? What would you guys like to do? Because if we wait till the next finance meeting, then we have to extend it. Is everyone okay with that? Mayor Calvin, are you okay with that?
No, I'm not, to be honest with you. You know, we already have the publications that have went out. Everybody got the notice that that was when our truth and taxation was going to be. And so then we would have to amend that. So I think if you would like to have another meeting, I think I would respectfully request that you do that on the 30th. So that you'd be prepared for the meeting on the 7th, but it's the council's decision, it's not the mayor's. I would certainly like us to move forward with our truth and taxation, but it is possible to move that forward. It is not a problem, but that would not be my recommendation.
Councilmember Osmus.
Why would we move it forward? What would be the purpose? What further information would we be getting or gathering that we don't have now?
We still need to review the capital improvement, and we need to review staffing, and we need to review the expense side of the budget. And we kind of took a step back by not doing that last meeting. We did it this meeting. So we need another meeting some point in time. So are people available on Monday, or our other option is to do to change the taxation meeting? Councilmember Plowman.
Are you saying this upcoming Monday or Monday the 30th?
The 30th.
I am available for what it's worth.
All right. Julie's available. Vicky's available. All right. We're back to the 30th. We will do that.
Councilman Chair,
We can do that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I maybe want to clarify, the truth and taxation hearing definitely will be on December 7th because the mayor is 100% correct. Those notices went out. So we do have to hold the truth and taxation hearing on December 7th. It can be extended if the council is not ready to act, but the hearing will be held on the 7th for sure.
It looks like everyone here is willing to meet on the 30th, and so let's proceed with that. If we run into trouble, we'll face that then. So we'll go to work on the 30th and try to deal with the rest of this. So does that sound okay with people? All right. Everybody's in agreement? Okay, let's move on to our discussion items. Mr. Okins, I see fund balances there, but I don't think we need to talk about them again.
No.
We'll skip to the local option sales tax report.
Madam Chair, I have kind of made a more friendly chart here to look at the dollar amounts. As you can see there, the projected monthly amounts was $250,000 for the local option sales tax. We came close to reaching that in the July collections. But are somewhat lower than that, but we are optimistic when we saw in January and February that they were closer to the $150,000 range. Now they're up in around the $180,000 to $200,000 range. Comments have been that the legislature may be looking at deferring the November, December sales tax. So we'll have to see what that possible effect could have on collections. But we are on direction that we should be able to, as we had indicated, and discussion has been to fund the projects as approved in the local option sales tax.
Okay, Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Steve, has there been further discussion regarding online collection of sales tax, reciprocity, and the amount of time that it takes to collect that tax and have that tax distributed? Is it the same time frame as the other payments, or is that something that we're expecting to potentially come later down the line? In doing some research, I found that other states are kind of dealing with the same problems for their projects, in that their reciprocal payments that their states are receiving come on a completely different timetable, and therefore they're receiving their payments, but those payments are coming later from the state. Do you have any information to supplement that?
Madam Chair, Councilman Plowman, I have had communications with the Department of Revenue as far as being able to break those numbers out to know what kind of dollar amounts we're looking at from online sales or outstate sales. They weren't able to provide that, but to get the information you're talking about, I'll need to contact them again, and then we can certainly provide that to the council. I'm not aware of the differences in time collections.
If I may, Chair Nelson?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's, in looking at this chart, you know, that could be something that would, I mean, we say, well, these numbers are low from anticipated, but I do believe with what I've been reading and seeing as being kind of a perpetual problem across the country, in that all of these online storefronts and systems from Amazon on down and all of the, you know, affiliate sellers, because of the volumes of business that these online, you know, e-commerce businesses have been doing, and their methodology for collecting those sales taxes. If we were to find out that, in fact, there is more money coming, that could change these numbers quite a bit. So having some answer from the state, I think, would be beneficial to us, because we would know, you know, that would give us a better barometer of where we are. So I would appreciate being able to see that.
Madam Chair, Councilman Bauman, our contact with the Department of Revenue is very good in responding, and so we can forward what we find out not only to you, but maybe the local option sales tax, the Invest in Wilmer group, so that they are aware and have that information as well.
Fantastic. I hope it turns up good. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Otherwise, Mr. Okins, I was going to comment, I liked your new chart that you sent out yesterday, so thank you.
That was a suggestion from Administrator Gromitz. I'll give him credit for that. And my
Thank
staff.
you, Administrator Gromitz. All right. Any other questions on local options, the sales tax receipts? If not, we'll move on to the October monthly report.
Oh, Madam Chair, I'm having difficulties getting my page to advance. Oh, there we go. Again, Madam Chair, as I mentioned, if we were in a perfect world, we would be at 84%. So if you want to look at the percentages, that's where the target would be. Under the capital improvement expenditures, I have emailed all the department directors and to give me a status of their capital improvements. On this first page, you'll see there that the squad car replacement, there's a small amount in excess of that. I'm waiting to hear from Public Works and Waste Treatment. But the Pro Patch pothole trailer, 42,000 is available as well. That has been purchased. And so on that first page, there's approximately $47,000 that will be available on the capital improvement that I mentioned in those when we were looking at fund balances. On the second page of capital, we're still waiting to hear from engineering on the City Hall, but the robot system was purchased in 18. That's available. The turnout gear, the garage floor refinishing, and auditorium improvements all would be available. They would total about $545,000. Again, auditorium is earmarked, as well as the 250 that I mentioned when we were looking at the fund balances as well. I don't know if there's any other comments on those items. We are still waiting to hear on all the Eagle Lake from Waste Treatment on what the status of what those projects are.
Councilmember Meske had to leave. He sent me a note, so, and it looks like Mayor Calvin left the meeting too, so.
Yeah, I had a chat from Mayor Calvin. In the short term or capital improvement expenditures for 2020, the short-term improvements for City Hall have not been obligated. They are still available. I mentioned the auditorium would be about 200 of the 250,000 would still be available. The reason it shows 447 is because there was a grant requirement that never was received. But all the other items, again, we're still waiting on confirmation from various departments to confirm. On the revenue side, again, 84% would be the most ideal. This goes to speaking towards the cash flow that we mentioned on the local government aid and the general property taxes. You'll see that both of those are lagging. And then the intergovernmental would be the local government aid. Service charges, fines, and forfeits. Service charges are behind. That's where the auditorium or the aquatic center and the rec programs would be. Those will be less, but you'll see when we get to the appropriation side that those departments are favorable as well because we did not incur the costs. So I don't know if there's any questions on the revenue slide.
Can't
Under
see
the-
everyone. But I don't see any questions, Mr. Elkins.
Under the general government, you'll see there that the assessing department is at 99. That's a one-time billing from the county, so that will be not go over. The one item on this page that we do have concerns, and we've talked about it before, is the legal. We are evaluating the costs there, and that is a lot of that is due to the number of projects we're doing. The curling club agreement calls for them to pay for legal costs, but the local option sales tax costs are being charged to this operating, and that discussion still needs to take place possibly when we look at that department overall, if the general fund can't cover it from other departments. So those would be the only comments I would have on that page.
All right. Julie, did you have a question? Nope. Okay. All right.
On the public safety side, you'll see there that the fire protection is under where the 84% would be. That is driven a lot by fire calls and the amount of man hours responding to that. So that department should be pretty good. I did have communications with the police chief today. Chief felt that he would be able to keep his budget, his department within budget. They are incurring some more overtime than usual, but that is due to the staffing levels that they are encountering. But he is the departments are aware that we have changed the process now to where they need to communicate with the administrator and I and watch their budgets, especially in the last 3 months of the year due to the audit findings where some departments have gone over. So I really have no additional comments on that unless there are questions.
I don't see any questions.
Under the recreational and cultural side, you'll see there the auditorium, and we've talked about that, the aquatic center. Those departments are less than 50% of where their operating budget would be, and that's due to the circumstances that we are dealing with the closures and the shutdowns. So the revenues, even though the aquatic centers were down and the rec programs are down, we are down on the expenditure side too. And we can do a special report and just break out the recreational side. We'll do that as at staff level for sure. The council will have to let me know if they want to do it at a committee meeting. But again, 84%. Overall expenditures are at 68% roughly.
Mr. Elkins, if that's something that you do at the staff level, it might just be helpful to send it out to the council for information purposes. I don't know if we want to bring it here or just in general.
Sure, past councils have requested, I know, recreational program analysis, and I know that Rob has provided that as well, so. It's something,
Councilmember Osmus, did you have another?
That's what I was going to ask, is if we could see that, because
All right.
I can see at the end of this year and going into next year, we're gonna have to have a serious discussion about Park and Rec, personnel costs, versus, activity and programming.
and as I mentioned earlier, we have sent out emails to the departments to communicate to us the status of all capital improvements and their operating budgets. So I just went out today, so we would hope to have that next week. On waste treatment, we have talked about that in the past as well. That's a timing issue where the utilities collects it, and then it's a month delay before we get it here. So again, 84%, the revenues are higher than the expenditures, and we're waiting to hear from management out there as far as the status of a lot of their capital projects. And then the final report there is the breakdown of investments by institution. And we will have the investment report again. In order to get anywhere close to 0.5%, you're going out past 3 years and possibly closer to 5 to 6 years. The best rate given for a CD today from one of the brokers was 0.32% for 3 years. And with that, Madam Chair, if there are no questions.
Anyone have any questions on the financial report for October 31st? Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Chair Nelson. Just a quick question. When we're looking at the last page that you had on the screen regarding our balance in Bremer Wealth Management, where was, I imagine the money was reallocated. Where was it reallocated to?
In the Bremer Wealth Management?
Yeah. Or am I reading it wrong?
Are you talking about Bremer Bank or Bremer Wealth Management?
I'm looking at on the compared to market value. Well, I can't see the top of the screen, but in one column we're at 652,000, and in the right hand column we're at 23,000. And I'm wondering if that's a change year over year, and if so, where the money.
That reallocation went from the mutual funds to invested in different instruments. So you would see the increase into the Bremer Wealth Management up above.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That balances out. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay.
And we use Bremer Wealth Management for a majority of the funds. We're using 4M as well as Wells Fargo Advisors at this point. It'd be our 3 main brokers that we're dealing with.
Any other questions on the October report? I don't see any. Any requests for anything additional for November? Not seeing anything there either. So COVID-19 report, Steve, is that?
We are compiling. Yeah, we have no report in the packet, Madam Chair. We're compiling those final numbers. The council, as you know, took action on Friday, I believe it was, to send some money back. We have spent all the funds and have exceeded the $1.5 million that we have gotten, primarily due to some additional extended paid sick leave for employees who have been self-quarantining or have gotten reports back. And so those funds will be made up through the sick leave reserves, the non-departmental budget.
Okay.
Those final numbers for you at our next meeting.
All right. Sounds good. Department report, anything, Steve?
I really don't have anything to report. I've been out for a few days, and so I'm just getting caught up. And my staff again has been covering for me, doing an excellent job. I don't get too many calls from Administrator Grommet, so he must be getting answers when he needs them from the finance staff. So I thank them very much.
Mr. Okins, go ahead, Councilmember Osmus.
Just for information, ballpark, what are we having to take out of the sick leave reserve? And did we ask the county if we could have the 55,000 back?
I don't know if Mr. Grommet has had that conversation with them or not. Like I say, I've not been in the office, so.
At this time, we have not had that conversation. Steve and I were just communicating over the last day or two, and this was brought up as a comment, and we'll have to figure out exactly how much that is as he finishes up his financial analysis.
I don't know if that's something we can ask or not, but it might be worth asking. I can tell you at the Convention and Visitors Bureau meeting this week, they received, they had applied for the grant and did not receive the full amount. And they were notified from the county that they were getting additional funds. And so the county must have some funds to be doing some of that with. There were also some requests for the CVB to work with some of the different groups that they work with too with that. So it might be worth an ask. If I don't know, I don't have a clue. It was an interesting conversation, and I was going to ask Steve to comment. The Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities had their fall retreat today, which was, by the way, supposed to have been in person in Willmar. And hopefully the plan is for them to do that next year here in Willmar. But there were comments and concerns about the CARES funding, and if there were more funding to come, that it would be allowed to be used to supplement kind of some operational kinds of things that cities were incurring. So, so it might be worth an ask. I don't know if it would work or not. Mr. Okins?
Two items. We did receive an email. I think Administrator Gomez received an email from the county just reminding cities and other organizations of the reporting requirements and timelines on if there were any excess funds to be turned over to them. Also, as you mentioned in the coalition meeting, I believe the state had, and they have an additional like $22 million sitting that they are considering to reallocate, and that's why we are accounting for the full amount, even for the additional extended paid sick leave amounts, which we get final numbers from the payroll this week. And we'll be recording that and reporting that as excess expenditures over the initial dollar amount that we received, in case there is additional funding coming from the state.
Councilmember Osmus.
Okay, so back to the original money. I had heard that the county was able to keep 800,000 in that money, and I was under the impression that all of that had to get spent by that certain date, or it was lost. I'm just curious if what would I have heard, and why would they have been able to keep 800,000?
They have different rules, I think, than the cities did, if I understand correctly, a different time frame. Is that not correct, Mr. Okins, Mr. Gramitz? From a reporting standpoint? Isn't that why we were supposed to give our money back to them? Does anybody know?
Yeah, that's correct. I don't know the actual numbers, but their rules were different as far as the timing to spend them. it might be that they have funds that they have to spend before the end of the year. But they've, their use was different than cities' uses. I mean, it's like the county doesn't have Park and Rec. They've got Health and Human Services, as compared to, our use of money is going to be different than their use of money. And it may be that they're allowed to, retain monies for a particular program. Schools also receive money, and they could use it for school purposes, which we don't get involved in. So I don't know what the school rules are, and I didn't really spend any time trying to figure out how the county was going to spend their money. So I can't give you an exact answer, other than the Chairman Nelson is correct. They have different rules.
The other thing I would say is the coalition put a policy forward or something they're going to work on next year. The assumption is that we probably will be seeing some additional funding from somewhere, federal, state, et cetera. And so there were concerns with what the city's regulations were versus some of the others. And so they have been collecting information from, concerns from cities, and we'll be working on that next year too, because the legislature decided how to do this and kind of did it at the last minute. And so who gets what and how they get it, I think will be up for grabs next time. And I know if we have concerns, we should be sharing those too, to work on what might happen if there is more, a version of more money coming somehow. So we'll see what happens, but all right. Mr. Okins, any other comments you would like to make from what we heard today? Steve, do you have any comments from the coalition meeting?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Other than the legislators that were included in the meeting indicating that there probably will be a reduction in local government aid, but if it is reduced, it would be in the second half of the biennium. That doesn't guarantee it by any means, but I think that that's the mindset down at the state, that if they're due to cities already having their budget set, that if they're going to reduce that, that will be in the 2022 notification, or the second half of the biennium.
The four that were there represented different parties and different, the Senate and the House, and they all realized what cities were going through, and that would be their hope, they said. But the numbers are up for grabs. The one thing that I wrote down is just basically everyone should prepare. We may not see things next year, but the year after that, they were talking about, how do we do it kind of thing. So with that, so are you good, Mr. Okins?
Yeah, one additional comment, and then I see Administrator Grumman had a comment as well, and that is that if the council, and we can send this out as well, remembers that back in May and April, we put together scenarios of what we would do budgetarily if we did start incurring some budget costs cuts. I would say that would generally hold true moving forward, but Administrator Gromans and I would need to look at that again and maybe revise it, tweak it a little bit.
Okay, Mr. Gromans.
Yeah, I just wanted to note, I think for the record, the last time cities got LGA unallocated, they did split it up into 2 years. And if memory serves correct, let's say if you had $1 million reduction in LGA, the first year was like 700, and then the second year was 300. And so I would expect that the state's going to look at its past practice and probably do something very similar, albeit it might be less the first year and more the second year. But but they're definitely probably gonna, split it up into two of our fiscal years as compared to one of theirs.
Go ahead, Mr. Okins.
As information, and you've had this information in the past, Councilman Nelson, when you've been at the coalition and stuff, we do have a spreadsheet that shows the historical data of our local government aid and our property tax levies and the unallotments that Administrator Gromans is talking about in 2008, 9, and 10.
Yeah, very much so. All right. I'm just going to go around. Councilmember Alvarado, any questions? Oh, first of all, before I do that, are we okay to meet on Monday the 30th at 5 p.m. instead of 7? Can we do that? Yep. Okay. Everybody okay with that? I was hoping that was the plan, so thank you. All right. Councilmember Alvarado, any questions or requests for information regarding the rest of the budget?
No, this is a lot of information. It's always interesting. There's a lot of numbers, and it's good to hear it over and over again. Eventually, it's gonna sink in. Thank you for everybody's work.
All right, Councilmember Davis. Any?
No, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for the really good explanation of everything. It was very informational. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fagerly. You haven't said a word all night.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I'm fine, thanks.
Are you sure?
I'm sure.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Osnes.
I would just echo
Can't hear you.
Alvarado and Davis. It was really good information, and I know we've probably heard it all, but I need to keep hearing it to understand it. And so I leave this meeting and I think I have a grasp on it. And then, 3 months later, I don't.
Well, we will ask again. We will ask again. That's part of it. So, Councilmember Plowman.
Yeah, no, just thank you to Steve and his department for all of their hard work. Crunching the numbers is something that constituents generally don't see. They're not made privy to. We don't understand until we're actually at the table learning this stuff and seeing how it works. So I have gained a new appreciation over the years as to just how intensive all this stuff is and how important it is regarding our community. This is the backbone of the community, and all of the rest of the work we do is kind of contingent on all this stuff working out. So thanks for all the hard work.
Administrator Gramitz, any thoughts or requests?
Not at this time.
Okie doke. Mr. Okins, are we good?
Yes, thank you very much. And I have nothing else to add.
All right. Please make sure if you do think of some questions afterwards that you send it to staff so they have a chance to respond to that. So thank you everyone for your involvement tonight. I think we got through good work. So looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. A motion, we will
Fernando,
accept
you didn't
that.
have a question. You were just going to move.
Yeah, I'm moving.
Okay. He's hungry.
All right. We're going to be adjourned. So thanks everyone. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.